She saw a ghost car in Cemetery Lane. Melbourne Herald, 13th of May, 1950. There are ghosts in Australia, according to readers who have written to the Herald this week about last Saturday weekend's magazine story, What Keeps Australia's Ghosts in Hiding. Mrs. Anne Nugent of Rockbear Grove, Ivanhoe, said today that she and her husband often walk down Cemetery Lane, Corowa, during their courtship. The lane had the reputation of being haunted, a story that had something to do with a motor car. She and her husband laughed heartily one night when walking down the lane they saw the bright lights of a motor car approaching. It vanished before it came level with us, said Mrs. Nugent. We searched everywhere, called out, and didn't see a single soul. The headlights were very bright. We are positive we saw them. It was very eerie. Mrs. Nugent said that on another occasion, she and her sister and a girl named Lillian Schreck went to a hotel in Dramana to work for the holidays. They were given a room at the top of a narrow stairs which led to the kitchen and dining room. It contained 3 single beds. One night they had locked the door and put the light out when they heard tap, tap, tap up the stairs. Someone in a great hurry indeed. We waited. The door opened about 9 inches, and the light from the hall streamed into the room. Then the door closed without a noise, and all was quiet. I asked the others if they had heard anyone coming up the stairs. Both said they had. I got up, put on the light, and found the door was locked. I got into bed with my sister for the night. Mrs. Nugent said that next day they were told by other members of the staff that some time before 2 men in the kitchen had argued. One had chased the other up the stairs and stabbed him. To the Herald she added, I'm not spooky and didn't know of the trouble in the hotel before this happened. The other 2 can verify the facts. Speaking of ghostly cars, from the Saturday Journal, 26th of January 1929, Phantom Ford. A ghost, but a very modern one, in the shape of an old Ford car, is alarming Roscommon villagers. The car is seen hovering about the Killeven district, close to the town of Roscommon. On one occasion, a meeting was being held in a local workshop, when up dashed the mysterious car, ablaze with light. The occupants of the workshop fled in all directions. Villagers afterwards said that phantom women and men got out of the car and danced through walls and hedges to the sound of weird music. A dark cloud was seen over the district, which according to the villagers foretold a great calamity. Children refused to go to school, and motor cars brought parties to the haunted district. The Phantom Ford is known as the Jumper, because it may be heard jumping and hopping along the road. The Barrier Miner, on the 8th of August 1951, tells us that a ghost haunts a government office. Canberra. A ghost is said to haunt the health department at night. 2 cleaners who tell the story prefer not to give their names because they fear ridicule, but they are quite definite the ghost roams the building's corridors after office hours. The first cleaner said today, I spoke to the ghost on one occasion, and it just disappeared. It looked like a woman, dressed in a long flowing robe, with a thick cardigan wrapped around her. Its outline was very vague and misty, and it just vanished when I said good night to it. The second cleaner said the ghost had been seen in various rooms, but had vanished when approached. On the 29th of November 1962, the Canberra Times tells us that a ghost was laid by Vicar. It was business as usual in the haunted supermarket in Long Whittenham, Berkshire, yesterday. I think the vicar has well and truly laid the ghost, manager Derek Bird reported. Mr. Bird and his staff had shut up shop for the day on Monday, and the vicar of Long Whittenham, the Reverend Cecil Roberts, held a 15-minute service to exorcise the store's trouble-making spirit. The nurses' quarters at Jamestown Hospital in South Australia are said to be haunted. A nurse named Colleen Stewart slept there on the 25th of August 2002. Even underneath 4 blankets she felt very cold and heard the sound of a tap dripping when there were in fact no taps dripping. The Sunday News of December 26, 1920 had a story by Bushboy, the authenticity of which could be vouched for by several people who were alive then. 4 miles from the thriving township of Crookwell lies a farm known as the Valley. It has been in the possession of the Warnes for nearly 100 years. The house, a rambling old building built of solid bluestone, has stood the ravages of time and the elements, and today is as good as ever. One evening at dusk, when the family was sitting at tea, 3 horsemen rode quietly up and tethered their horses to the fence, and quietly approached the house. Before the inmates were aware of their presence, a voice said, "Keep your seats, we are bushrangers." One of their number then collected a couple of shotguns that were standing in the room. He then poured water down the nipples, thereby rendering them useless for the time being. The men then seated themselves at the table and asked the lady of the house to serve them with eatables. The bushrangers chatted amiably with their unwilling host, and informed him that they were Ben Hall, Johnny Gilbert, and Dunn. When they had finished dining, they asked Mr. Warne what horses he had, and told him they were going to take some, as their own were knocked up and the police were closely pressing them. Mr. Warne was forced to light a lantern and lead them up to the stable. The bushrangers ran their eyes over the animals and picked them out. One was the racehorse Waverley, which was in training for races to be held at Goulburn in the near future. Young Warne, who owned Waverley, asked Gilbert to leave the horse, but Gilbert was adamant. Seeing the distress of the lad, Gilbert said, "I'll promise you faithfully I'll return the horse to you within a month, and look, Johnny Gilbert never breaks his word." Gilbert was leading the horse out when he espied a new saddle hanging on a peg. Taking it down and looking it over, he decided to take it too. Young Warne told him that he had only brought it back from Sydney the week previous, and in those days it meant a long journey, which was only undertaken twice a year for supplies. "I'll leave you my saddle," said Gilbert. "Here's something worth 10 saddles," pulling a magnificent diamond ring off his finger and handing it to the lad. Whether he possesses the ring or not today, I don't know, but the probability is that Mr. Warne, who is hale and hearty today, does still retain it. The bushrangers then left and rode off into the bush, Johnny Gilbert singing out at the last moment, "I'll see that you get the horse back safe and sound." 2 days later, near Goulburn, the sons of Mr. Faithful were returning in a covered wagon across the plains from a wild turkey shooting expedition, when they espied the bushrangers. Being armed with magazine rifles, they were determined to fight the bushrangers. A miniature battle started, the bushrangers opening fire, but they were at a disadvantage, having to reload their muzzle-loading pistols. Gilbert was taking steady aim at one of the Faithfuls, when Waverley, the racehorse, threw his head up as Gilbert fired, and the shot crashed through the poor animal's head, killing it instantly. Gilbert lay down behind the dead animal and continued to fire, while Ben Hall, who had dismounted, took refuge behind a post, which still stands today as a proof of the excellence of the young Faithful's shooting, having been hit several times with bullets. Eventually the bushrangers were driven off, and were not heard of until a month later, when they stuck up the store of Mr. Slater of Binder. No doubt readers will wonder where the ghost comes in, and what all these preliminary incidents have to do with a ghost yarn. When the news that Waverley had been shot reached the owner, the message came from Gilbert that he was very sorry that he had taken the horse, and some day would buy one as good and give it to him for the loss. Time dragged along, and eventually Gilbert was captured and hanged, never redeeming his promise to repay the loss of Waverley. On the 5th anniversary of the day when Gilbert had stolen the horse, at the precise hour when he had led it from the stable, one of the young Warnes went to the stable to water the horses. There were 5 stalls in the stable, 4 being occupied and 1 empty. But on opening the door, the lad discovered that all the stalls were full. Thinking that someone must have called, he held the lantern high up to see if he knew whose horse it was, when to his consternation he saw a man leaning against the horse, with his arm thrown over the animal's neck. He recognised the man as Johnny Gilbert. For a minute he was rooted to the spot. Then he made a dash for the house and informed his father of what he had seen. Returning to the stalls, they found only 4 horses, and young Warne was soundly berated for his imagination. However, it was noticed that the other horses were in a highly nervous state, and were trembling and sweating profusely. From that time the valley became known far and wide as the Haunted Valley. 25 years ago the valley was leased by Mr. Henry Warne to a farmer who became obsessed with the idea that he was seeing ghosts, and consulted a clergyman who advised him that such phenomenon did not exist. However, he was found drowned in only 2 feet of water, and a significant fact was that he was found face downward. In the 1980s, a 16-year-old girl in Ulverstone, Tasmania, reported that a ghostly visitor was invading her bedroom. The phantom was that of a motorcyclist who had died in a smash. "How would you like a face like mine?" the ghost asked, referring to his mutilated features. The girl's mother, sister and boyfriend also saw the maimed wraith. Eventually, the family contacted a spirit rescue group who contacted the ghost through automatic writing, and who revealed his name was Mick. Mick knew he had been injured in a crash, but thought he was still alive. Only when the spiritualist pointed out that Mick had entered the room through a closed door did he admit his incorporeality and leave. This story is called Howling Spirits, Mystery of a Haunted House. A matter which might engage the Society for Psychical Research is just now the talk of Turin, reports the Rome correspondent of the London Daily Mail, under the date August 8th, 1899. In an empty house of 3 stories, number 4 Via Monserrato, in that city, there have been heard strange noises, which in default of other explanation have been attributed to spirits. One of the noises is described by a number of people who have heard it several times as like the whistle emitted by a siren. This was first heard on Wednesday last at 2 o'clock. In the apartments in the left wing of the house, fearful cries have been heard, and noises such as the moving of furniture and the breaking of glass, and the appearance of smoke are also mentioned. But it is the whistling noise which seems to be most remarkable. The police took the business in hand and instituted an investigation. The official charged with the inquiry began by threatening the persons about the place with prison in case the affair turned out to be a practical joke. He had not finished speaking when from all parts of the house there proceeded the most terrible howls. The official adjourned the investigation. In the neighbourhood of the haunted house many people have fallen ill with fear. So far, investigation by the police and public has revealed nothing as to the cause of these noises, which are accordingly attributed to howling spirits, and the numerous spiritualists of Turin are in a state of high excitement over this manifestation, which confirms their faith. Another Italian ghost was reported in the Perth Mirror on the 28th of February 1953. Antonio Fossati, 42, was tormented nightly by dream after dream in which his dead brother-in-law implored him to take a note from the waistcoat pocket of his shroud. To placate Fossati, the police inspector ordered the tomb to be opened. There was a note. It was read, and burnt immediately under Italian regulations ordering destruction of objects found in coffins. Fossati had his first dreamless night. From the Tasmanian Tribune, 19th of August, 1873. A ghost. The Melbourne correspondent of the Bendigo Advertiser says, "A story comes to my knowledge which borders on the mysterious, but perhaps the spiritualists may yet find it out. My informant, a respectable tradesman of Fitzroy, alleges that some few nights since he became aware that something was moving about in his house, but remarked at the same time the peculiarity that his dogs, contrary to their usual wont, took no notice of it. He rose, lit a candle, and went about the house, and in one of the doorways he saw an old woman, or her wraith. The said old lady, when in the flesh, she died a short time since, having inhabited the room, she stretched out her hand and said, 'Murder, murder, murder,' with a peculiar burr, as in life. He declares solemnly that this was no dream nor mental illusion whatever, and that he immediately searched and sounded the room, and the next morning took up the flooring, but found nothing. The story having got currency, some of the progressive spiritualists interviewed him, and believing there must be something in it, they have hired the room where the old lady is said to have revisited the glimpses of the moon, but after 2 or 3 nights watching have retired, not having again had an appearance." Here's a strange story from the 25th of March 1905, from the Sydney Evening News. Puzzled by a haunted tree, spirits make an old oak to talk. There is treasure buried in my roots, treasure. Spirits in Kentucky have done strange things, but the spirit that haunts an ancient oak tree on the farm of Will Albert, near Heath, is the strangest yet known. The above revelation of riches was heard, as it has been heard often in the past, according to a committee of reputable citizens who visited the haunted farm. "Sober? Of course we were," indignantly asserted the leader of the committee when interrogated. The voice was distinct, ending in a long drawn-out wail. "Well, yes, we did have a little something along to ward off the cold, but it was only a nip, you know. The spirit is not stilled yet. In fact, it is not even distilled, so far as known. For several years the tree has been a mecca for the curious, and those interested in psychic phenomena have visited the place. It is said a deserter from the Confederate Army was captured and hanged to a branch of the oak in 1862. It is his spirit that is believed to haunt the place. The family who lived on the farm several years ago were so frightened by their ghostly neighbour that they sold the place at a sacrifice and moved west. An effort will be made by local scientists to solve the mystery." Border Chronicle, from Bordertown, South Australia, on the 24th of April 1931, tells of the ghost of a car, a bush mystery. Beyond Broken Hill they tell of the phantom lights, 2 mysterious bright lights, like motorcar headlamps, that follow the road, then suddenly disappear. So frequently have they been seen by people on a station about 150 miles north of Broken Hill that they have come to be looked for. One night, a little while ago, the owner of the station was standing on the veranda of Government House, as the station hands know the homestead, waiting for some friends who were expected to motor from Broken Hill to stay the night. At 10 p.m. they had not arrived, but presently over the rise 2 motorcar headlights appeared. They followed the road, coming nearer, and the squatter, convinced his friends were coming, ordered the kettle to be boiled for supper. Walking out on the veranda once more, he saw that the lights were much closer. He could see their reflection on a tin fence nearby. He glanced at his watch in the light from the doorway, then looked up, and the lights were gone. No friends came that night. Next morning the squatter drove along the road, but no sign of a recent car track was to be seen. No car had been along that road for several days. This is only one of the many times on which the lights have been seen. Once a boundary rider on the station was sitting outside the boundary hut at night when he saw two lights appear. Thinking it was the boss's car, he put on the billy. The billy boiled, but no car came. Other people have seen these mystery lights, and nobody knows the cause. There are theories of a ghostly motor car, a swinging lantern at the homestead being reflected, a luminous mineral, but none can say why the lights should follow the road. They follow every turn, every rise and fall, and as motor car lights would be, are reflected on objects. A theory advanced by the station owner is that small white stones on the road become covered with a thin layer of sand. When cars pass, they wear off the sand and polish the stones. On a cloudy night, when the wind is blowing the clouds in the same direction as the road and the moon is shining through a break, the polished stones on the car's tracks give a reflection. The clouds continually moving, and so does the reflection on the road, giving the impression of two moving lights, which seen from a distance may easily be taken for car lights. Whatever the cause, the phantom lights remain a bush mystery, a spooky tale from our own outback. The Newcastle Sun, 23rd of April 1953. Manila's haunted house. A haunted house which has caused the dismissal of a policeman in a Manila suburb is now begging for a tenant or buyer. The house, located in Quezon City in the suburbs of Manila, used to house the UNICEF mission in the Philippines. It was put up for public bidding recently, but up to now there have been no offers. The reason, according to government officials, is that there seemed to be widespread acceptance of reports the building is tenanted by a bearded ghost. Some imaginative people reported having heard eerie sounds coming from the deserted building. A Quezon City policeman assigned to guard the building was found to have abandoned his post one night and was dismissed. He claimed he was driven away by unnatural sounds coming from the building. The World's News from Sydney on the 2nd of January 1954 recounts the story of Polly's ghost. Probably one of the oldest and best-known spooks in Australia concerns Polly McQuinn's waterhole in the Strathbogie, Victoria district, not far from Euroa. Many and varied are the stories about Polly and the waterhole. Polly McQuinn was a niece of Pollock McQuinn, a pioneer of the district. One day she set out for Euroa to purchase household necessities. While in Euroa the stream rose. When she was returning, the current was so strong that it swept her into the waterhole, and she was never seen again. Ever since, the waterhole has been called Polly McQuinn's waterhole. On a moonlight night, every 7 years, so the legend goes, Polly makes her appearance. Another bit of ghost lore from World's News, 20th of January 1951. Morgan's ghost. Old hands around Woodend, Victoria, will tell you that the ghost of Dan Morgan still rides over the mountains in the vicinity at night. Not far from Woodend is Hanging Rock, claimed to be Morgan's hideout. There is an underground stream which emerges near the foot of the rock and runs over the cliff. The water in this stream is always rust-coloured, and a deposit of red rust is left on the rocks. Because of this and the link with Morgan, the water has long been referred to locally as Morgan's blood. Morgan was shot by a station hand at Pichilba Station near Wangaratta. His head was cut off and sent to Melbourne to be examined for scientific purposes, which no doubt accounts for one story. That of the ghost that rides about the hills is a headless ghost. At Christmas 1955, a man was travelling to Sydney from Melbourne. 3 or 4 miles past Glenrowan, he was looking for somewhere to make a camp for the night, when he saw a man, all in white, seated upon a white horse, staring at him. He felt like going back and speaking to the figure, but thought better of it. As it occurred near Glenrowan, the man thought it may have been the ghost of one of the Kelly gang of bushrangers, 3 of whom had died in a shootout with police at Glenrowan in 1880. The 4th race of the day at Happy Valley Racecourse in Hong Kong on the 2nd of January 1960 was marred by a fatal fall. French jockey Marcel Samarc was killed, and the day's events abandoned out of respect. It was whispered a month later that jockeys and stable boys had seen the phantom form of Samarc on the course in the misty winter mornings. In the late 1980s, Andy Barker, the officer in charge of the police station in the New South Wales gold mining town of Hill End, admitted that the townspeople were quite correct when they said the station was haunted. In his 4 years there, he had seen inexplicable phenomena, particularly doors opening by themselves. One night he locked a prisoner in a cell, only to find the steel door wide open in the morning, yet the heavy old padlock was still in place on the bolt. The prisoner was also still in place, having slept through the ghostly attempt at freeing him. Locals said a prisoner had hanged himself in the exercise yard one night, and that he had haunted the place ever since. From the Wellington Times, 28th of October 1920. Strange but true. Prospectors' noisy ghost. Macquarie Digger, who vouches under his proper name for the truth of the story, writes to The Guardian. Some years ago the writer and several other men were doing some alluvial mining on the Macquarie River. It was in the month of July, and was in the midst of a drought. The Macquarie River was dry in some places for 1/4 of a mile, and numerous diggers were working in the bed of the river. The writer and the others mentioned made a rough and ready camp on the bank of the river, and under a mountain with huge rocks and caves. Some tents and lean-to constituted our habitation. The sleeping apartment of each was about 1 foot deep, of oak and green leaves, on the ground. Close by the camp, a gully ran up into the mountain, and down this gully came the Yet. One bright moonlit night, somewhere about 12 o'clock, when all the camp was asleep, including 3 dogs belonging to the men, which would face anything, the awfullest shrieks and piercing sounds I have ever heard were heard from down this gully. The first thing we knew was that the 3 dogs fell into the camp, head over heels on top of us, and nothing we could do would persuade them to go out again. We got out and about, but could see nothing, although the country was clear. We waited a while, and then, as all was silent, we went back to bed. We threw the dogs out several times, but nothing whatever would persuade them to remain outside. The disturbing and awful sounds were so often repeated, and became so pronounced, that unable to solve the mystery we packed up and left the place. Some months later, an old man who was down close to this particular place, looking for bees' nests, was going up a big creek where he knew of a spring, to see if there were any bees drinking. Walking along a small green patch near the creek, he was surprised to see a good Cossack boot laced up. It struck him as being strange that this boot should be in such an out-of-the-way place. Taking his axe from his shoulder, he cut the boot across the instep. Imagine his surprise to find the bones of a human being's foot within. He looked up the creek a bit further and found the skeleton of a man, a prospector evidently, who had been dead a considerable time. Beside the skeleton was the man's swag, and a tin pannikin close to his hand. It was supposed that he was making to the spring already mentioned, and when he got there found it dry, and perished for want of a drink. Now by going up the gully where we continually heard the weird sounds, and passing over a hill, it was not far to where the skeleton was found. I often think that what we heard were the cries of some disembodied spirit. Others camped on the same place after the old chap's body was found, and heard nothing, and were never disturbed. You can form your own opinion in the matter, but we were compelled to quit our camp and find another, after which we were never disturbed. In 1929, the Armadale Express and New England General Advertiser reported on a weird house. Strange things are happening at the house of Mr. R. McLennan, a retired Metropolitan policeman, who lives at St. Neots, Huntingdonshire, according to a London paper. By some mysterious agency, furniture is moved, kettles dance on the kitchen range, articles fly about, apparently all the phenomena usually associated with a poltergeist disturbance. The family consists of Mr. and Mrs. McLennan and their 15-year-old son Donald, and the demonstrations have been occurring for some time, commencing about 7 o'clock one Friday evening, when canisters standing on the mantelpiece in the basement kitchen began to wobble and then fall to the ground. Mr. McLennan said that he and his son actually saw one of the canisters fall from the mantel-shelf. He drew the correspondent's attention to a nail which, bounding up from the mantel-shelf, stuck itself in the wall. Buckets of water turned over, seemingly on their own accord. A domino flew up from the kitchen table and broke the glass shade. Small articles flew about and played havoc amongst the glassware. The climax came one evening, when a heavy footplate from the kitchen range was hurled itself, out of the room, took a left-hand turn, whizzed past Mr. McLennan, and crashed against the scullery door with such force that a piece of the metal was broken off. Mr. McLennan told me that he was at first inclined to suspect Donald of perpetrating tricks, as nearly all the demonstrations occurred while he was in the house, but he now felt certain that the boy was not to blame. While I was in the house one afternoon, and Donald was out, there were two mysterious noises. In one case there was nothing to account for the sound, but in the other we found that a metal flower bowl had moved from its position beneath the hall stand and was standing upside down at the head of the stairs leading down to the kitchen. One of the most curious things that has happened is the breaking away of a solid piece of mortar in a bricked-up doorway in the basement passage. In the crevice were found two old fragments of bone, whether human or animal is not known. Another weird experience which the family have had is to hear a hissing noise moving about the kitchen. Last night, said Mr. McLennan, the noise followed Donald and I as we went out into the town.